How's it going, everybody? Welcome to the Apples and Genos Fantasy Hockey Podcast. My name is Josh Hutchinson. I've got my boy John Binkle with me here today. How you doing, John?
I'm wonderful, bro. My wife and I just got back from a trip to Napa where we visited for her best friend's PhD ceremony. And it happened to be
Nice.
in this small college town in Northern California where I lived as a kid in the early 90s, like elementary
No
school
way.
age. Yeah, completely unrelated. Like my wife is from a small town in North Texas. And it was really a trip to like go back to this place that I lived in like 96. You know what I mean? So it was cool to
That's
see
very
this
cool.
small town, like what, 25 plus years later. And then we took a day trip to Napa to celebrate. And I got to be like the star of the trip because I used some of my service industry connections to get us like fully buffed out at one of the nicest wineries in Napa.
Nice.
And yeah, it was really cool. Like I got a lot of pats on the back for something that I was just kind of like, hey, can you help me out? And they were like, yeah, sure. Like, so it made me feel pretty good to be able to like give something to the group and to her and like not have to pay out of pocket for it. So
Nice. That's
yeah, it
fun.
was
That
a good
sounds
time.
great.
It
That
was a
sounds
good time.
great.
We got there and we rented a car and they were like, for $10 more a day, you can get a brand new convertible Mustang. So I had a wicked
Ooh.
sunburn across the front of my forehead, like right where the line of the windshield was, because I'm a pasty white dude and I was in Northern California in the sun for 5 hours a day. So,
Worth it.
but it was a great
Totally
time.
worth
Yeah.
it.
I'm
Yeah,
ready to cook.
absolutely. Well, we're doing an afternoon pod today, and that means I don't have to go to work for a while. So I'm gonna have myself some brewskis. Nice little. This
Moosehead.
is this is just a moose head. It's just like a very macro lager in Ontario. So I'm gonna crack
I'm
it.
uh I'm drinking an artisan caffeine water
Oh, very
by a
good.
company called Red Bull. You might have heard of it.
Very nice. Very nice. Yes, I have had myself a fair share of Red Bulls in my days for sure. All right, let's get into let's I got a skill testing question for you, or I guess just like a nice invasive life question for you.
Ooh, I like
If
invasive. Okay.
if if you could join any past or current music group, who would you join?
All right. I have one clarifying question.
Okay.
Am I joining them right now as they are, or am I joining them for the duration of their career as it's been? Am I just
Well,
like a part of the band forever?
I would say because the question says current or past, you could pick any point in time, whether it's the duration of their career, whether it's currently. You it's open to interpretation, so you just go for it.
Okay. I'm going to go with past and for the duration of their career because it was and is so monumental. I would definitely join Metallica, like
Cool.
through the
That's a
late
good one.
'80s and early '90s, like playing the biggest concert in the world in Russia and being on stage for James Hetfield having his face lit on fire and playing through all of the phenomenal members of the band that played bass for them. Like, uh, I feel like it would be really cool to, have been in the group when they got crucified for tearing up Napster and all of that. Like, there's so many benchmark moments for Metallica that would just be cool to be a part of. And then on top of that, Metallica just absolutely shredding. So
Yeah, that's awesome. I think for me, I don't think it's any secret. I think I've said it a lot online. I've said it a lot, probably on the podcast. I'm not sure, but I'm a big Blink-182 fan. They've always been one of my top favorite bands. They're my guilty pleasure favorite band, and they're also just my real favorite band. I think that they have just such a fun-loving vibe. I would obviously skip all of the tumultuous times where they broke up and hated each other. We'll skip those points in time. But I think the growth of the band from just like a bunch of teenage dudes playing shitty punk rock in their garage, and then just all of a sudden just like going huge for some reason because they made really catchy music, I suppose, getting super huge, and then I don't know, dealing with the fame and whatnot. But it just at this point in time with their second reunion, it just seems like they're having a lot of fun, like more than I can remember them having. And I just think that's really cool. And I saw them twice on this tour and really vibed. And yeah, I think I would definitely join Blink-182. Obviously, as a fourth member, I wouldn't want to replace anyone because you just can't replace any of those three. But I think they could use like a second guitarist because it's really just a three-piece. They don't add any
I was gonna
musicians.
say you're totally gonna screw up the dynamic of that 3-piece pop
I
punk
know,
band.
yeah.
Like,
No, it definitely
are you
would.
gonna play the
But
tambourine? Like, what are you
yeah,
gonna
well,
do? You know what I
this is
mean?
an imaginary scenario. I do think that having a second guitar, like uh, there would add to uh the performance. You know what I mean? Because they've
Okay.
always been a three-piece. They have some backing tracks that they play. So I think that I mean, I don't think I would be completely useless. I mean, I'm not a very good guitarist, so that's not great. But I don't. To be frank, Mark and Tom have never really been very strong bassists or guitarists
No,
either. So
not
they're just
gangbusters.
they're
No.
just catchy songwriters, and then Travis makes them look really cool. So that's really the dynamic of the band. So yeah, so that's the one I would join for sure. So today, topic of the show. So obviously Nate and Blake last week talked about the big transactions from July 1st and 2nd, and even before that, and kind of the fantasy relevance of some of the biggest transactions. The plan for this week was to talk about everything that's happened since, and quite frankly, there's been almost nothing since July 2nd. So we're gonna kind of talk a little bit about some names that maybe Nate and Blake weren't didn't cover or weren't as high on, or that we have strong feelings about. So we'll go over a few names here and there. Um, and then, I mean, there's obviously some speculation going around. There's still some big names on the market. Vladimir Tarasenko is the big one. I saw Michael Amato bring up an interesting idea where, well, I guess he was rumored to go to Carolina. That it seemed like that was going to be a done deal a few days ago. And he has since fired his agent and brought in a new one. And they've kind of restarted the process. So it's difficult because at this point, after July 1st and 2nd, everyone kind of blows their load on the free agents. There's not a lot of money to go around in a cap world, especially with the cap not going up very much this year. So I'm not really sure that there's a ton of money out there for Tarasenko, unless, like Michael Amato suggested, he wants to sign a 1-year deal in Chicago, play with Connor Bedard, try and bring his value up, maybe get traded at the deadline to a contender, and then can sign a big deal next year when the cap is supposed to go up $4 or $5 million, and there will be a little bit more money out there. I don't know, man. What do you think? What do you think about Tarasenko? Do you have any thoughts about where he could go?
Well, it really makes me wonder, right? Because is like a perennially successful player who obviously is not going to end up on the Rangers. It just isn't. It's not going to work cap wise, and I would assume that he is looking for an extended deal for the tail end of his career, and
Yeah.
the cap situation is pretty ugly this year, and not expected to really jump until after next year. So it seems like a situation where he's going to end up on a team that has 5-6 million available this year, and maybe play for 1 year or 2 years with some extension possibility or some bonus possibility that makes it worthwhile for a player of his caliber. But it's so muddy at this point that I don't really have a good grasp on where he's going to end up. It feels to me like it will be a situation that is dependent on other teams making a move in the coming month and then him ending up being the replacement for whatever player gets shipped out of
Right.
town. Like my gut feeling is that he ends up in Ottawa replacing Debrincat
Yep.
after whatever shakes out for Debrincat. But the teams that jump out to me as a place where he would want to go and play as an upper level player don't really have the maneuverability to sign him to the money he wants. And after kind of middling through St. Louis for the last couple of years, and then going to the Rangers and not making a giant impact in that playoff stretch that they were hoping for from him, it's really unclear what he wants. And now hearing that he's fired his agent and wants to start again, it's kind of apparent that whatever he wants, he's sticking to what he wants. And his previous, and I'm, making an assumption here, but it's like his previous agent was like, yeah, that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
These are the options that we have. What do you want to do with these? And he was like, no, I'm going to get somebody that's going to agree with me, whether or not
Yeah.
those things are actually possible. So, maybe it's a situation where he goes to Florida and replaces where Duclair was playing. Like there's some spots out there where suddenly after this initial slew of moves that there's an opening, but not necessarily the cap feasibility. Like I've seen musings about him ending up in Toronto after whatever happens with the big four shakes out. So more than anything, I feel like it's a wait and see approach for him. Like I feel like
Yeah.
he wants to get paid a certain amount of money on a certain type of team, and none of those things are available right now. So, and honestly, I feel like the longer he waits, the less likely he is to get that, kind of antithetically to where they seem to be as an agent and player combo.
Yeah, I think it's I mean, it's an interesting strategy. But yeah, I think like you said, there is still some movement to happen. There's still some significant movement that I think is going to happen. Debrincat is a situation that I think is kind of developing right now. At least that's what everyone's saying. So I think, and I have heard it floated around that Tarasenko could be their backup option, and in that case, they would probably have the money to pay him. So, I mean, but like, why? I don't know. I don't know why you'd want to go to
That
Ottawa.
direction,
Yeah,
yeah.
I'm not really sure. I guess Ottawa is a team on the ups. Like like it's worth noting that. I think they are going to be competitive this year. Um, I mean, yeah. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens with Tarasenko. But I personally think it's probably in his best interest just to sign a 1-year deal somewhere. I mean, and like Mike Amato said, I like that idea. Play with Bedard and Hall. That's like a really formidable top line. You're gonna get the shit played out of you. You're probably gonna play close to 20 minutes a game, and you'll be playing with one of the best up and comers in the league. So I think that's probably in his best interests, and then get traded to a contender just like he did last year, and then
Yeah.
set him up really nicely for next off season. So, and then the other name, I mean, we haven't heard it become official yet, but everyone's saying that today's the day when the Tony DeAngelo trade's supposed to happen, where he goes back to Carolina at 50% retained, which is so hilarious. I guess what held up the trade before was that there is a rule in the
Mm-hmm.
CBA in order for there not to be cap circumvention, that you cannot trade a player back to a team with salary retained within 365 days of a previous deal happening. So they're
Right.
waiting for a year after the initial trade from Carolina to Philly in order for him to come back because there is salary retained. So, I mean, let's talk about Tony DeAngelo for a little bit. I think what is Carolina thinking? So obviously their power play was not as strong as they'd hoped for it to be. Even though Brent Burns, I feel like, was pretty productive this year, at least for him at this stage in his career. Are they thinking of just getting the band back together, putting D'Angelo on power play 1, and kind of moving Burns down the lineup? Because obviously that hurts Burns's fantasy value greatly if that is the case. But yeah, is D'Angelo their power play 1 option? I assume that he is, because he doesn't really have a lot of other value in the lineup in Carolina. What do you think, Binksy?
I mean, how do you take Brent Burns off of power play 1, right? Like perhaps it's them trying to save Burns for the meat of the season for the playoffs, but their defensive pairings are relatively strong, right? Slavin, Burns, Shea, Pesci, brought in Orlov. Chatfield played well at the end of the season. It's not like they have a dearth of viable defensemen, but it's also not the typical Tony D'Angelo is headed somewhere else situation. Like they know exactly what they're getting from him, and they wanted him before, and they want him again. So it's hard to say what the mindset is for Brindamore and the idea of what's going to happen for their defensive pairings. I can't just jump to him being the power play 1 quarterback. Now, obviously, they're not banking on Pacioretty anymore, so perhaps they want to do a 2 defenseman power play, and they want to play with Burns and Tony D'Angelo, and then just have their 3 specific forwards for that power play and just run that power play 1 into the ground. But
yeah,
I mean, he's a quality player. He's a quality fantasy player. And it does make me wonder about what they're going to do with the rest of the 6 defensemen when he comes on, right?
Yeah.
Like,
there have been rumors about
out?
There's rumors about them trying to move Brett Pesci, so I don't know if that is something that will happen in order to create space there for him. He is a right shot defenseman as well, so we'll see. But yeah, worth noting, D'Angelo had the best season of his career in that 1 year with Carolina, so maybe they're just trying to kind of bring that magic back, because I feel like obviously offense was what they struggled with last year. Obviously not like the offense in I mean, if you're talking about like Corsi 4 or scoring chances 4, it's the conversion. So
the old puck luck.
Yeah, exactly. So maybe they're just trying to bring that magic back with D'Angelo. All right, let's talk about some guys that I don't know, some names that I think are interesting that are on some new teams. So I'm going to start with Gabe Vilardi. So Vilardi was part of the Pierre-Luc Dubois deal, so he is now in Winnipeg. Winnipeg obviously bought out Blake Wheeler, who is now on the Rangers. I haven't heard a ton of talk about Vilardi. He does still need a contract. He's an RFA. So we'll see kind of where the money, how the money works out there. But obviously Winnipeg's going to want to sign him. Like there's not a lot of people that want to come to Winnipeg. So really the only scenario where you're going to get quality players is via trade. So they're going to want to sign him to a deal here. Last year, he had a pretty solid season. He scored at a 30 goal pace and a 53 point pace. His shooting percentage is a little bit high, 18.85%. I don't imagine he's that type of player, but he does have a pretty high conversion rate over his career. With a limited sample size, he's probably closer to a 15% shooting percentage. His underlyings are not amazing, but they're not too bad. His individual scoring chances for per 60 was 9.83 last year, despite his shots per 60 being only 7.45, and individual Corsi for per 60 12.63. So really not bad. He had a career high in ice time last year at 1536. But he wasn't getting as much ice time near the end of the year. He was playing in the top 6 for a little while, playing on the top line. Played on the top power play for pretty much the whole year, but he was moved down the lineup on 5-on-5 after a little while and wasn't getting as much ice time in the second half of the season. So I think he's going to get a really nice top 6 opportunity in Winnipeg, truly just because there's not really anyone else to put there. So
Yeah.
I think he's a guy that they see in their top 6. He's a pretty defensively responsible player, which is honestly a huge upgrade over Blake Wheeler. So who basically just dogs it on every shift defensively. So I think that he'll slot in really nicely on probably their second line. And we'll probably get some pretty good minutes. It may even see power play one time. So I'm liking Gabe Vilardi next year. I think this could be a breakout year for him and the best opportunity that he's had yet. So what is your take on Gabe Vilardi here?
I am pretty much always kind of more in the camp of Iafallo than I am of Gabe Vilardi. He obviously had that stretch towards the earlier portion of the season where he was just excellent and shot up the lineup for the Kings until that kind of burned out. So I'm curious to see if there's that consistent struggle with Iafallo going with him to the Jets, whether it goes back and forth, because they're clearly a pretty veteran team at this point, right? And they have a coach that tends to defer to the more responsible defenseman veteran players. So it's kind of a mix for me, because I feel like if Perfetti plays well, then he takes that spot from him on power play 1. And he's definitely not going to hit line 1 with Ehlers and Connor on the wing. Like those are cemented positions. So between Perfetti and Iafallo and Vilardi, I'm either in my drafting strategy going to go straight to Perfetti and the upside, or I'm going to go to my own personal druthers and emotional feeling about it and stick with Iafallo and pay a little bit less in the draft than I am with Vilardi. I think the talent is there. I like the metrics. I think you're absolutely spot on with him shooting 15%, right? Like we've seen it be 15. We've seen it be like 12. And this last year it being 18 after that really impressive hot streak. So I like Vilardi, but in the situation that he has moved to, there are a couple other similar options that I am either going to draft a little bit higher or a little bit lower. If there is a point in the draft where he has slid a little bit and he's in that range where I would be drafting Iafallo or watch listing Iafallo, then it's more of a conversation for me. But just gut instinct, I'd be going with Iafallo and kind of assuming that shakes out in my favor, because Iafallo just seems to play well in underrepresented roles, right? Like he is one of those guys that tacks on a lot of game-winning goals in key situations, seems to be out there on the ice when it's important. And Vilardi is out there when he's playing well. And he definitely feels like someone you might draft in your fantasy draft and then have an awful opening month and then let hit your waiver wire, and then he explodes, So it's blurry, and it's more blurry considering that he still needs a contract from them. So We'll see.
I think so. I actually researched Iafallo as well, just to look at his stats, because I was kind of interested to see, because I think there is a possibility he plays in that top 6 as well. I think as it stands, I could see Perfetti moving to center next year and being that second line center now that Dubois is gone, because I just don't know who else is going to play center in that top 6 unless they acquire someone else
right
via trade.
Nemestikov doesn't make you feel good there. So
I don't know exactly. I'm not really a huge Nemestikov guy, so I think so I liked Vilardi's numbers a lot more than Iafallo. So Iafallo, believe it or not, incredibly consistent, but has never scored more than 30 points in the NHL. I was really surprised to see that, because he's a guy that has, I've always had an eye on him in terms of streaming when LA has a good schedule, but really not as productive as I would have expected. So whereas Vilardi last year, his pace was better than anything Iafallo's ever done, and he's much younger. So for me, the upside I feel like is there with Vilardi. So that's why I think I would take a chance on him. And he's definitely a guy that I think you could get late in the draft next year. So he could be a good swing in with one of your last picks, and that could have potential upside there. So that's why I wanted to touch on Velarde here for sure. Let's talk about Sean Durzi. Sean Durzi's your boy. Why don't you talk about Sean Durzi a bit? So this is why I wanted to talk about Durzi. I was listening to a podcast. I know I tweeted this, but I think he's going to see a massive time on ice bump. His agent, I listen to his agent talk on a podcast that I listen to all the time. It's the Steve Dangle podcast. I'll shout them out. They don't really need a shout out. They get way more listens than we do. But Alan Walsh, his agent, said that his understanding from Arizona is that he's going to play on the top pair. He's going to get top pair minutes 5-on-5, and he's going to likely quarterback power play 1. So that is huge green light for me with Sean Durzi. I feel like that's going to be, he's going to have a huge breakout year. So why don't you talk about Sean Durzi?
The opportunity for him to be the guy in Arizona is wide open, right? Like Moser showed a few flashes, but zero consistency in that regard. So the opportunity is wide open for a player that is through a couple of years getting almost 20 minutes on ice, right? Like that could really pretty easily jump to 23, 24, 25, considering who they have in the defensive stacks. But what concerns me, and perhaps he's got a ton of runway because, other than Moser, there isn't a lot else going on there. He is really prone to bonehead defensive stretches, right? Things that got him straight pulled out of the lineup in LA, where they were just like, no, you can't. We are too good of a team for you to just be giving these options up and ruining a win for us. So I have concerns about him literally defensively, but offensively, he's got all of the room in the world to grow. He's got the skills offensively. He's got the availability for them. I am concerned that they're going to see some things that they don't like from him defensively, and it changes the mindset, but they also don't have a lot to play for in Arizona. Mm-hmm. Like if he gives up some awful defensive plays, like, oh, well, like what do they really have to lose by him doing that? Like it's the opposite situation that it was in LA. There's no one to battle for time. There's nothing really to lose to see exactly what they have in him. So the possibility that he is a 60, 65 point player is pretty easy to see, right? Like, it's going to be him, and it's going to be a guy be very successful as a fantasy player. So I think it's really, really possible, and I like Durzi a lot, but I do have concerns about him as an actual defenseman and how the organization is going to perceive that. But they obviously knew what they were getting. It's not like they just kind of traded for this player blind. Like they know exactly what they're getting. So maybe I'm a little bit more hesitant than they are worrying about that.
Sure. Yeah, no, I think I like what you said about how there's not really anyone else, because that's the key right there. I don't think it really matters what its defensive play is like. There's not a lot of competition there. Juuso Välimäki's another guy that he was getting reps on PP1 after Gostisbehere and Chychrun got shipped out at the end of the year last year. But I still think that Durzi will outplay him for power play 1 there. So I think, and I also think he's so young. He's only 2 seasons in the league, playing third pair minutes in LA. So I think there's still time for him to work out those defensive kinks. So I think that this is going to be huge for Durzi. I'm feeling really good about it. 43 point pace in LA last year, playing under 20 minutes a night. So and that's not playing on power play 1 either. That's huge. Doughty had that locked up last year. So I really like it, especially playing with guys like Keller, Schmaltz, Barrett Hayton, who had a great finish to the year last year. It'll be cool to see what he does next year. And then I don't know who's your fourth forward, Jason Zucker, maybe. I think that's an upgrade on what they had for their fourth forward last year on the power play. So
probably.
that's a pretty nice power play, actually. Not the best, but a good situation for Jersey. All right, so let's talk about Riley Smith in Pittsburgh. They got him for a third-round pick. Nice little tidy work from Kyle Dubas. He had some questionable moves in so far in the offseason, especially on July 1st, but I like this one a lot. He's pretty much a perennial 55, 60-point guy when he's healthy. He's going to slot in right alongside Evgeny Malkin. I can almost guarantee it. Right where Jason Zucker was. Zucker had a great year last year playing with Malkin. Malkin was fantastic last year as well. His best year in a long time. I think he's kind of the perfect player to play with Malkin. I can't really quantify that, but he just seems like the type of guy that's like not a big name, but he's like a guy that's just a guy, you know? He's always in that 50, 60 point range. He's always in that almost draftable position, or like draftable at the bottom of your draft. But I like him a lot. His underlyings are pretty decent. He saw a bit of a dip last year. He had 10 individual scoring chances for per 60, which is really nice. That's kind of a number you're looking for. It dipped a little bit below 9 this year, but still pretty solid underlying numbers. Nothing that blows you away, but they're pretty good. So I like him a lot playing in that top 6. He's not going to get PP1, but I mean, just look at Jason Zucker. He was able to be fantasy relevant and productive, at least for stretches last year, playing on that second line. So I would look at Riley Smith to do the same, even though he doesn't have the same peripheral upside as Zucker does. What do you think, Binksy?
I think this previous season was kind of a high water mark for Riley Smith. He had a career high in total shots attempted. His ice time was really bolstered this year, playing in the system that he was playing in. Obviously, the situation that he is moving to in Pittsburgh, like you alluded to with Malkin, is excellent for fantasy prospects. There's not really anywhere for him to go in those lines. He's not going to go up. He's not going to go down, right? So we don't have to worry about variability with him outside of him as the player. I'm not super excited about Riley Smith, but as we talked about on the previous sets of shows, I'm pretty down on Pittsburgh right now, right? I was pretty high on them going into the season, and I saw a lot of really bad indicators and bad metrics from the team. They look kind of washed, honestly. Perhaps Dubas injects some things that change the curvature of the team, but I'm a little bit scared about that. And I think that they are paying for a player that is really on the downslope. And it's stupid of me to say that, considering that he had some high water marks in his stats, but they also were an excellent team in Vegas last year, and he's going to a team that is not necessarily primed to be excellent this year, right? They've got Crosby, they've got Malkin, and what else are they working with offensively, right? So I don't love it, but every single prognosticator, fantasy and otherwise for hockey, absolutely loves this move. They absolutely love the 1-2 combo that's going to be going on with Malkin and him. Like, the phrase I heard over and over and over again after this move was, "This is a perfect fit." Riley is the exact player that Malkin needs. So I don't know. I'm just not excited by Riley Smith. I feel better about going back to the well with Malkin with Smith there, but
Sure.
I don't absolutely love it. Riley Smith is a super boring player to me fantasy wise, and
I don't think you're wrong.
I'm more likely to take some lottery tickets for
Sure.
league winners than I am to take Riley Smith in the spot that you're going to have to take him.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that's totally fair. Let's talk about a couple new Leafs because that's what I like to do. I know they really Nate and Blake touched on these guys before, but I want to touch on Bertuzzi and Domi here. Tyler Bertuzzi signed a 1 year, $5.5 million contract with the Leafs on July 2nd. He had a 49-point pace last year, but it was really an injury-filled year and kind of a weird year for Bertuzzi. His shooting percentage was super low, really uncharacteristically low. On-ice shooting percentage was super low. It was just a very bizarre year for Bertuzzi. The year before, he had a 75-point pace. So that's kind of more what I would look at. I think he's going to play with probably Matthews and Marner or Matthews and Nylander or any combination of the core four there in Toronto. And that'll be a great situation for him to bounce back. He also worth noting, he kind of figured himself out by the end of the year in Boston. He had 5 goals and 10 points in 7 games with the Boston Bruins in the playoffs. So that's kind of what I'm looking at with Bertuzzi. He's a little shithead. He's a little pest. He's not going to hit a ton, but he's just, I mean, in terms of real hockey, I'm excited for that kind of energy in the lineup for the Leafs. Domi's kind of the same. Doesn't really hit a ton, but he's a little shithead. He had 56 points last year, which is probably about his ceiling. He's probably not going to play the 18 minutes a night that he did in Chicago last year. He'll probably play middle six, but he'll move up and down the lineup when needed, like very, very Kerfoot-like in the way that they utilize him, I think. But I think he's a huge, huge upgrade over Kerfoot. I think he is a way better converter. I think he's a better playmaker. I think he just does more offensively. Apparently not very good defensively at all, but I don't really care. But he's a guy that I think will probably be a streamer next year, unless there's injuries and he moves into the top 6, because he got Matthew Nyes there too, who I think probably deserves a top 6 role. We'll see what they do there, but I think Max Domi will play at the very least middle 6 minutes and could be at times fantasy relevant. But Tyler Bertuzzi is the guy that I really like him a lot. So what do you think, Binksy? What do you think about those 2 additions there?
Overall, I really love the moves that Toronto has made as a hockey team. Like adding Revo, adding Domi, adding Bertuzzi is exactly what everyone has been calling for from the Leafs for a couple of years now, right? It's just like we have all of these excellent skill players and we need some guys with the quote unquote grit, right? We need some guys that are missing some teeth, and they added Domi and they added Bertuzzi. And I think Reeves has all his teeth. He's actually a pretty guy, but
because he beats the fuck out of everyone. They can't even get a fist in on him because he's such a tank.
So as a team unit, they have done exactly what they need to do to take that next level, right? Assuming that they work things out contractually with the Big Four, which I really feel like, just gut instinct wise, I feel like they have to, right? To change course at this point doesn't make a lot of sense. But fantasy wise, Revo's not moving any needles. Domi's really not going to move any needles. The situation that he has gone into is better for the team, and it's better for him as a hockey player on a team, but not as a fantasy player. Bertuzzi, I am very excited about fantasy-wise, right? There are multiple cup-level teams that wanted to bring him in last year, and the Leafs were able to get him. They probably overpaid at 5.5, but as we're going to talk about, through the next set of players, there are a lot of 1-year deals out there for players that deserve 4- and 5-year contracts that are betting on themselves to get paid when the cap increases or get paid after an excellent season. And Bertuzzi is at the absolute top of that list for me. The situation kind of could not be better for him. And, barring Nyes exploding and taking over these minutes that are available on the wings, I think Bertuzzi is set for an absolute monster year. A 75-point pace 2 years back, I think, is very doable with the offensive talent provided that he gets the ice time. And at $5.5 million, it seems like they're going to give him that ice time. So I am like way, way, way in on Bertuzzi. I think it's excellent. I was in last year and I was super, super excited to see him as a Bruin. Like I really thought that was where he was going to stay. I thought they traded for him to stick around. And I think him going to the Leafs is a total steal for them as a team. And I am going to be jumping all over Bertuzzi in best puck drafts and definitely in redraft leagues.
Yeah, he's kind of like Marchand light. Hey, like a poor man's Brad Marchand. Maybe not quite as pesky, but like that's kind of how I viewed him when he went to Boston. I was just like, oh yeah, of course he goes to Boston. He's like exactly a Boston Bruin player. All right, so just quickly, Connor Brown went to Edmonton, 1 year, $775,000. Really low risk deal for Edmonton. His upside really is going to depend on where he plays in the lineup, but there is a possibility that he plays in the top 6. And that is definitely worth a swing at the end of your draft. He has been a 50-point guy playing up and down the lineup in Ottawa. But if he plays with McDavid or Draisaitl, like he could obviously reach new heights there. I think there is that offensive upside for Connor Brown. He is a guy that's very defensively responsible, very versatile, kind of, I mean, a player that any team could use. He's like, he's like what what they wanted Alex Kerfoot to be in Toronto and how they used him. That's what Connor Brown is. And except actually like he's like actually effective both offensively and defensively. So yeah, obviously if he plays in that top 6 in Edmonton, that's huge. He has played with Connor McDavid. He played with him in junior. So there is that potential chemistry there. So I like that a lot for Edmonton and for Brown. And yeah, if he's getting those top 6 minutes, I definitely like him as a late round swing. What do you think, Binksy?
Well, I'm sure you remember this. I was really high on the prospect of him being successful in Washington.
Yeah.
And, obviously everything went wrong in Washington this year and that didn't work out. But there really isn't a better situation for him to go to than alongside McDavid or Draisaitl.
Yeah.
And given the history, you kind of assume that he'll be slotted slotted alongside Connor McDavid, right? Like Kane played very well on the wing with Draisaitl. That situation worked out for them magnificently. And anytime that you're going to be getting a player that is next to McDavid, you like it. So I'm a fan of Connor Brown. The situation has gotten massively better. And, there's zero chance that he gets on a power play of meaning. So that's a little bit limiting. But when you're going to spend all of your time on the ice next to McDavid, that's a phenomenal upside. And if you're taking a flyer on him at the end of your draft, that's exactly what you want in those later round lotto tickets, is a player alongside a world beater who has a history with them and clearly has the talent that teams are willing to take a gamble on across the league. We've seen it multiple times with him after his, kind of run of middling alongside lineups in Ontario. So I really, really like it. And I'm just a big fan of Connor Brown in general. I believe in the player. So I'm like super excited to see what happens with him in Edmonton. And I will definitely be taking shots on him later in the draft.
So a few goalies quick: Korpisalo, Hill, Talbot. Aiden Hill, I just wanted to give you flowers because you deserve it. Your hot take at the start of the year was that Aiden Hill would end up their starter. And he was the starting goalie for a Stanley Cup winning team. So I wanted to give you your flowers there. He got a nice little contract, making a good amount of money for a goalie. So that's nice. He is not going to be a 0G candidate because I think he's got way too much press at this point. Is probably going to be the starter in Vegas next year. So I think he's going to be drafted a little too high for my liking as a likely tandem goaltender with Logan Thompson. But I just wanted to give you your flowers there, Binksy. I think you deserve it.
Well, To be fair, my hot take was that he would get 30 wins, and I think 3 shutouts. So,
Sure.
including the playoffs, I think he got 28 wins and 2 shutouts.
I think it's still
a bulk of those wins and shutouts were in the playoffs, and unfortunately, a bulk of them were against the Stars, and both shutouts were against the Stars.
it's still. I honestly, man, it's as close to a win as you can get with the takes that we had at the start of the year. I recently re-listened just to see what our hot takes were and if any of them hit, and that's the closest to a hit. Other than, and I should bring this up on mic because somebody owes somebody else a hat because we did make a hat bet saying whoever, because my hot take was that Cole Perfetti was going to win the Calder, which absolutely did not happen. But your counter was you thought Jack Quinn was going to get more Calder votes than Cole Perfetti, and Cole Perfetti got just edged Jack Quinn out by a hair in terms of Calder votes. I think he had 5 points and Jack Quinn had 3 or something like that. So it was obviously not what we expected, but I still won the bet. So
yeah, you did. And I have to say this, those votes were bullshit because Jack Quinn had a much better season.
I know. I thought for sure I was going to lose. I thought for sure I was going to lose.
I saw that tag, and then I looked at the list, and I was like, "You got to be kidding me! How did he get outvoted for this?"
Perfetti only played 40 games or something because he was hurt for the second half of the season. So, yeah.
And Quinn had some stretches that were intensely good. So, like, what the hell happened? But you are absolutely right. I do owe you a hat. And I friggin' hate that I owe you a hat, and I hope that you never wear the hat. I hope you get the hat and then you ceremonially burn it. Yeah. I hope that it itches when you wear it. I hope it doesn't fit right. I hope it looks stupid on your head.
Yeah, that's fair. I think that's fair. And then a couple goalies that swapped places, not in a trade, but just in like the way that they sign their contracts. Korpisalo ends up in Ottawa for way too much money and for way too long, probably, but could be a great 0G candidate in my opinion. I think he'll probably be their starter, especially with Forsberg potentially still injured to start the year. He's going to get a lion's share of starts there. And then Cam Talbot in LA, going to be a tandem goalie with Phoenix Copley. Not a super ideal scenario, but I still think that gives Talbot a bit of value in drafts. So both a couple of 0G candidates. Do you have any takes on those two?
I feel like the outcome will be reversed, right? That Korpisalo will go to Ottawa, be injured, lose the starting gig to Forsberg, who comes back at some point healthier while Korpisalo is injured, as he has been before. And then Talbot goes to the Kings, kind of unceremoniously takes over the starter role and has a pretty solid season where he's getting the bulk of the saves. So I feel like everything is just going to switch places, and I don't really believe in either one of them. Neither one of them are going to go in my astronomical hot takes going into the season. Of the two of them, you're going to have to draft Talbot higher based on the name brand and the success of the team. And of those two, I would be doing that. Like, I don't want the possible volume of Korpisalo, and I think the chances that Talbot seriously supplants and completely takes over for Copley are pretty good. I don't think anyone, including the Kings, really believes in Copley. So
I think I'm the opposite. I think I swing for Korpisalo, but that's just a difference of opinion. I liked Korpisalo last year. He played really well in not great circumstances. We'll put it that way.
That's fair.
Max Pacioretty, 1 year, $2 million with Washington, super low risk deal. Pacioretty, once he's healthy, is such a monster in terms of shot generation, chance generation. He's one of the best in the league. So playing in that top 6 in Washington, that's unreal. Playing on that top power play with Ovechkin, playing the opposite flank as Ovechkin, that's terrifying. So that is I mean, that could be huge for Pacioretty. But I don't know. What do you think about Max? Obviously, a huge injury risk. I'm not necessarily saying you should draft him. Maybe as a late round swing. I don't know that he's going to be healthy to start the year, but I still like the potential here. What do you think, man?
So he just recently did a roundtable with the DC Sports Talk people, and it was an awful interview. Just by the by, it was terrible. Like they all had terrible questions. His response to them was terrible,
He's a
and
very dry. He's a tough interview. He's very dry guy.
they that's absolutely true. But the question that they had for him was, what do you feel like you could have done differently to not get injured again last year? And how is that going to affect this season? And they rephrased it like 6 times. And by the end of it, he was just like, we did everything that we were supposed to do by the benchmarks. We're doing them again. You know, I'm not trying to do anything differently. Nothing happened last year that wasn't supposed to happen. And while listening to it, I was like, I think we all thought you came back too soon. Like
Yeah, we said it multiple
every
times.
single one of us was like, that seems like a bad idea. Like
I'm
that's not going to work out for you.
yeah.
And it of course didn't, right? And we're talking about an Achilles injury to the same leg 2 times in a what 700 plus day period. Like,
Yeah, not
that's
even.
like, and we're not talking about a 22-year-old that this happened to where you're like, are they going to be able to build a career from this? Like the dude is going to be 35 by the end of the year and coming off the same injury to the same leg as a scorer. And the first thing he said was, I'm excited to get back to scoring goals. And I'm like, I just want to see you skate. You know what I mean? Like, I want to see
Yeah.
you dig in at the end of the line and be able to turn and not tear your leg out again. So it's
Yeah.
really like scary, the prospects. Now, with that said, the situation that he is going into is a team that pretty much as a whole is trying to do what he is trying to do, right?
Yeah.
He's not trying to join the Hurricanes and be a scoring addition. He's trying to join the Capitals in the same stride that pretty much all of them are trying to do. They're trying to come back, be successful, and play their style. So, like you mentioned, him playing opposite of Ovi is exactly where he needs to be. And it's going to take a lot of pressure off him. He did note in that interview that he is not going to be ready for the beginning of the season. So there's potential for you to get real value out of drafting him and stashing him on your IR, or even if he makes it through your draft and picking him up, a few weeks earlier than he's set to come out. I can't see a world where he comes back sooner than we think this time.
Yeah.
So I feel like it's got to kind of recalculate to the other side of the prognosis and him coming back later this time rather than earlier. So take that into account. But in the leagues that I am in, I assume someone will draft him towards the end of the draft to be an IR stash. But there are a lot of leagues out there that don't have the room for that. So, a 1-year deal at $2 million on the Capitals, there's a chance that he plays himself into a contract. But at this point, after these injuries, I don't believe in it. I don't see it. Like the situation is great and he's got everything in the world to play for. I mean, there's $30 million on the line basically if he has an excellent season, but I just don't see it. I can't see it being successful after a double Achilles surgery. Like that's awful. Like that's career ending. And I'm really shocked that it didn't, frankly.
Yeah, we'll see, man. I mean, I think because of the caliber of player that Pacioretty is, he's worth at least a consideration because the upside is huge, like massive. So if it does work out, it would be it's a game changer for you, for your fantasy team. So I think he is going to make it through a lot of drafts. Like, I don't think he's going to be drafted a ton just because of his injury history. So that is very interesting. Or at the very least, he'll be drafted at the last 3 rounds of your draft. So that's where I get a little more excited about Pacioretty, because there's really not, you're not going to have to spend a lot of draft capital on him. Daniel Sprong, Mr. Fourth Line in Seattle, signed a 1-year, $2 million deal with Detroit. He's got a really nice underlying numbers. I took a look at them. I think playing in a larger role, which he likely will in Detroit. I mean, hopefully he will. A top 6 would be really nice. Potentially second line minutes. He had a 57-point pace last year, playing basically 11 minutes a game in Seattle with the guys at the bottom of their lineup. His on-ice shooting percentage was very high, 13%. So obviously there could be some negative regression, and there probably will be. But I like the opportunity he could get here. And honestly, I could see a minutes upgrade of like 4 minutes a game, which would probably offset the that really high on ice shooting percentage there. And I mean, he could potentially be a 60-point guy there. So he's a guy that I don't know, I'm interested in at the bottom of the lineup. What about you, Binksy? And it all depends on where he's playing in the lineup.
I feel like I'm going to start calling them the Detroit mid wings because they have so
Totally
much
agree, by the way.
middle roster talent that
Yeah.
I don't have a grasp on where he plays for them.
Yeah.
Like at
No,
all.
you're right.
Like I don't think that he takes over Kubelik's spot on the top line. I don't think that he takes over Perron. I think it's possible that he takes over for Berggren, but I mean, how much of a jump are you getting on that when you're getting a player coming into a new situation? So I would rather see him play alongside Larkin, alongside Comfer, but I like Andrew Kopp. I'm like the only person on the planet that likes Andrew Kopp. And I think there's a possibility that he continues excellent metrics playing in that realm with Berggren, Fabry, Kopp. Perhaps he goes to the second line and Perron moves around. Like there's a lot up in the air, and if they're able to bring in Debrincat, then that only furthers that, right? Like,
yep.
I don't see a lane for him to move and jump up in minutes. And considering that we are all kind of tracking the success and the underlying numbers of this season in Seattle, where they just scored in droves all the way around the lineup, that was nearly double his, or maybe more than double his career high in points with 46, right? 46 points was a career high and like double what we've seen for him. And, you know, this is not a super young player. He's 7 years into the league now, right? Like, yeah. I don't know that there's a corner that he's suddenly going to turn, and the situation is really, 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 really packed full of players at his talent level. So I don't like the situation that he has gone into, and I don't love him as a player. Like, he consistently burned me last year as a streaming option for the Kraken. Like, I always chose the wrong one, and often it was Sprong scoring when I didn't choose him, and then I would be like, okay, I'll believe, right? I see it. And then I throw him into the lineup and duds.
Nope.
So I'm out on Sprong. I don't see a situation where he gets more minutes and the metrics get better. I think he was a second to third line player that got to play with fourth line opponents and succeeded based on that, based on team success, based on team conversion metrics. And I don't think it was Sprong that was driving that. So, you know, another 1 year, $2 million contract, a prove it contract, maybe he's able to do that, but I don't see a lot of indicators for that being a possibility this year.
Fair. I think that's a fair point. You why don't you lead on the next guy?
So I am especially excited about Shane Gostisbehere. He also moving to Detroit. This for him a 1-year, $4.1 million contract. So another prove it contract. This one, like Bertuzzi, a little bit more weight behind it and a little bit more dollar bill belief in it. He's versatile on either side of the pairing. I think he has, unfortunately for me as a Sider believer, I think he has a potential to supplant Sider on power play one. I think that they could certainly have Sider eat minutes and then Ghost be the power play specialist. They're possibly a more consistent team after a series of offensive offseason moves. They certainly have more talent overall than they did last year. It remains to be seen whether that is something that turns into success for them. And they're clearly going to make a couple more moves. But the Iser plan has involved bringing in a power play specialist. And I don't think they did that for no reason. So I think there is a real possibility that you get him as one of the power play quarterbacks across the league. And with it not being formally announced, I think that there's a real possibility that you get Ghost as a serious value in drafts. So I'm excited to see what he's able to do. It's concerning because they have flip-flopped a lot in terms of who their guy is for power play defensively. And I want it to be Sider, but I think there's a real dark horse chance that Ghost Bear is the guy for them.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think Gostisbehere is going to be almost definitely going to be the power play one quarterback in Detroit. I think that Derek Lalonde made it clear last year that he's not sold on Sider being that guy. With him kind of moving back and forth with him and Hronik at times during the year, especially in the first half. So I think that Gostisbehere overtakes him almost immediately. Because why else do you get Shane Gostisbehere other than to quarterback the power play? It's similar to Tony D'Angelo, Tyson Berry, guys like that, where that's kind of where he makes his money is on PP1. So he saw success in Arizona being their PP1 quarterback. So I imagine in Detroit that's quite an upgrade. So I think I like Gostisbehere a lot, and I like what you said. I think he's going to be a nice value pick. He's going to be one of those 0D options if you like to do to employ that strategy. It's not something I employ, but some people have discussed the potential value of doing that. I don't agree, but you go for it. So Shane Gostisbehere, a good option. Definitely. JVR signed a 1-year, $1 million deal with the Boston Bruins. He only had a 39-point pace last year. His underlyings have dipped a bit over the last couple of years. He's had a career that's kind of been riddled with injury. His ceiling in his career is really only 60 points. That's his career high. I believe it's 61, and that was back when he was with Toronto. He is probably, I mean, looking at the Bruins lineup, unless they make more signings, I mean, we talked off mic about Bergeron and Krejci, whether or not they're going to come back. They haven't officially retired yet. It could be they come back partway through the season. We don't know. I think at their age, that might be beneficial to not have to play a full 82 game season. But I think JVR could see a spot in the top 6, potentially replacing Taylor Hall. I think he's a natural Taylor Hall replacement. And if they're looking for a net front guy on the power play, he is great. He's always been great. He has great hands in front of the net. He's a big body. He's a great at screening the goalie. And that's kind of been his bread and butter through his career. Like that's where he's had his success. So there is, I think, potential for him to play PP1. I don't think that that's a lock, but that's another situation where there is potential for something to happen at the very least. So I would say he's probably going to be more of a streamer but he's definitely a guy that I'm keeping an eye on, and I'll be keeping an eye on the way that they formulate their power play in the preseason. And JVR is a guy that I'm going to be interested in at the very least. What do you think, Binksy?
I think watch list is the hashtag for him, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, watch to see what Boston does throughout the rest of the offseason. Watch to see what happens with Krejci and Bergeron. Watch to see if they perhaps trade for some center depth. There's a piece of me that thinks that Radek Faksa will reunite with Montgomery. He's a quality faceoff guy. He's quality defensively. They really, really need center depth, and what the Stars need is some defensive depth. So I think that there's a chance that they make like a 1-and-1 swap, and Faksa goes there and sends back somebody like Lindholm, maybe someone at that that level of defensive presence. So there's a lot of wait and see in JVR for me. I think the situation behooves him. Like you said, there's some injury concerns, but he does have a 60-point ceiling, and perhaps jumping onto that power play, maybe taking over some back and forth time for net front's presence instead of Zaka is certainly possible. So there are some real possibilities for him to be a fantasy successful player, but I'm right there with you. I think it's very much a wait and see and top of your watch list situation than it is like I have to go out and draft this player.
And then the last guy we're going to talk about just briefly is Gustav Nyquist. He signed a 2-year, $3.185 AAV deal with Nashville. He's probably just a 50-point guy when healthy, based on his career numbers. But I think he's going to get some pretty nice minutes in Nashville just because they have a lack of star power. So he could play at the top of the lineup. Not sure really what that looks like in terms of offensive generation for him, but there is potential that he plays top line, top power play. I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility. So that's a guy that I just wanted to touch on briefly. Again, like JVR, probably just a watch list guy, but a guy that I'll be keeping an eye on for sure. What do you think, Binksy?
I'm right there with it. I mean, he's clearly going to be a top line player for them alongside O'Reilly and hopefully Forsberg at some point, wherever that LTIR works out. So I think 50-point value is right in line with that. The minutes are obviously going to be there. So I'm not excited about Nyquist, but the situation is great. And Nashville consistently gives you a value level player in the fantasy realm. So I think it's certainly possible. Before we duck out of here, I do want to talk about who he's replacing. Matt Duchene moved to Dallas.
We skipped him. I'm so sorry.
I was like, that had to have been on purpose.
That was not. But yeah, let's jump into it. I want to hear your take on Duchene.
Just too excited about your Leafs changes. All right, so 65-point pace last year, down from the incredible 90-point pace the year before that we all knew was coming. Individual rates took a dip, obviously. 65 points, probably what you can expect depending on where he plays in the Dallas lineup. I think that's certainly an achievable line. What makes you wonder is that NHL Network has him slotted for the third line in a display that shows that they didn't watch the Stars at all, right? Like they, other than the first line, which is obvious, they completely biffed on what I would see as a possible outcome. They have him playing in a really weird spot, and they have the second, third, and fourth lines not at all what Dallas insiders would project, what I would project. So I see him as a second line player. I see him playing alongside Wyatt Johnson and Jamie Benn on the second line, which was for the most part of the season a third line, and into the playoffs when they were really, really successful was a second line play. They have it completely backwards than I assume they do. They had Wyatt Johnson centering and Jamie Benn on the left wing and Sagan on the right wing. I think that Sagan is a third line player and a power play player at this point. He seems to have changed his game into more of a team first, facilitating smart hockey IQ guy than than an offensive star that he was for a long time before the hip injuries. So I think that Duchesne comes in to be that player that Sagan is not able to be anymore, to be an offensive weapon. And I think he does it alongside Johnson, which will provide the surge of energy on the ice, and you'll have two really smart veteran players in Duchesne and Ben on the same line. So wherever it shakes out, and clearly people don't think what I think will happen, I think 65 points is really, really doable. And I think there's upside for more, given he is a top level player. If there are any injuries, I don't think it will be Sagan that jumps to a top line. I think it will be Duchesne. And perhaps I'm wrong about that. Perhaps the team continues to stick with Sagan as the injury replacement, as the power play replacement. But I don't think they brought him in on accident. I think he's going to play himself into a 3 or 4 year deal, probably somewhere else, given the cap constraints in Dallas. But man, I mean, of all of the 1 year prove it deals, I am really, really excited about Bertuzzi and Duchesne. I think it's going to be an excellent situation for him. And I'm elated that they were able to get him at less than what was paid for Tomey. So,
Yeah, definitely, man. I think I like what you said about how he'll be an easy injury replacement to move up the lineup. My concern is that he's probably not going to get PP1. Like, I think they pretty much have that unit set in stone.
yeah,
So
they
that
do.
would be my only concern with Duchesne. But yeah, I think if, like you said, he plays alongside Wyatt Johnson and Jamie Benn, I think that's a great situation both for him and as Johnson as a potential breakout candidate. So
Yeah.
that's a situation that I really like, and I hope that ends up being the case. All right. That is all we have for today. We ended up going over an hour somehow, even though we barely had any new content, but we did well. We did well. If you like our content, check out the Apples and Ginos Patreon. You can support the show on a monthly basis and get extra perks in season, including access to the Apples and Ginos Patron League and extra weekly waiver wire articles and podcasts from Nate. There is a temporary off-season tier for only $2 a month where you can get early access to Nate's projections as he makes them. So you're going to want to check that out. He has released his first few teams of his projections. So there is some value to this $2 a month tier. So if you are into getting some early projections, get on over to that Patreon and support the show. Hop into the Apples and Ginos Discord server. Shout outs to the band there for providing our music. Their Spotify link is in the episode description. Give us a rating on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Follow us on Twitter. Binksy is at Binklemania. Nate is at Apples Ginos. Blake is at Blake Creamer SE. I'm at Just Josh and 401. Follow us on Threads. Are you on Threads, Binksy? Are you on Threads yet?
I couldn't figure out how to start Threads, actually. I turned 37 last month, and that's the age cutoff for figuring out how to get new digital platforms. So I'm interested in it. I'm super upset about a 600 read limit on Twitter. Like, that's so dumb. Like, he is really, really screwing his platform up. So, I mean, I've read some articles about other possibilities for things taking over for Twitter, but them having the backing of Meta seems.
Yeah, I think that's like the key right there. It's got the most press. And unfortunately, like, I wish that the alternative and the competitor would be something from someone that is not Mark Zuckerberg. But for now, it does seem like, I mean, I'm on it right now. Follow me. I'm at Just Josh in 1992. Just Josh in 4-1 was taken. So I had to do Just Josh in 1992. I don't know who's taking Just Josh in 4-1. I mean, it's usually my username no matter what, but I don't know. Well, it's very bizarre. But anyway,
I did get on it. That was me, actually. You're gonna have to pay me in a hat to get
it. So. Yeah. Okay, so it's an even. We're even now. I get my Threads account, and you don't have to buy me a hat.
No, I wish. I wish I was smart enough to do that.
So Nate is on there. I believe it's at Apples Ginos as well. Blake is on there. I think it's BL Cream with an E, CREAME. And hopefully Binksy will be on there. I imagine he'll be at Binklemania whenever he gets around to that. So yeah, follow us on Threads. Please practice safe stats. Happy summer. Have a good one, folks.
Bye, everybody.